Again, hello. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. And let me tell you what the plan is for this afternoon. And I'll just always start by saying I'm going to deliberately leave time in to, if people have questions or comments that they'd like to share, feel free to pipe up. As far as I'm concerned, you don't need to raise your hand. If you want to share something, that's great. So here's the plan for today. I brought some goodies. I am actually zooming in from my dining room table in beautiful Long Island, New York, on the other side of North America. What I wanted to talk about was three things today. And as I said, we'll leave time for questions and answers. I wanted to talk about interactivity. I wanted to talk about prototyping. And then, with your help, the direct audience participation section of the event, we are going to prototype something together. We're actually going to prototype an exhibit together. So I'm going to just plant a seed in your head right now for part 3. If you are working on an idea or you have an idea and you're like, I wonder how I could make an interactive exhibit of this idea, or how I could include an interactive element in an exhibition I'm working on or planning, pitch your idea in part 3. But let's start with part 1. So I want to talk a little bit about interactivity, but also I'll just say,
excuse me, famous magician's shadow illusion shocks Penn and Teller revealed. Fool US exposed.
Sorry, my computer's talking. Sorry. I just wanted to say it's all right if you want to leave your cameras off. I'm not the kind of person who's going to say turn your cameras on. But also, if you want to turn your cameras on, that's fine with me. I want to just pitch a question out there. And if you'd like to respond either with your voice or chat, I'm wondering, when I mention interactivity, or I say, yeah, let's talk about an interactive exhibit, what comes to mind? Somebody mentions interactivity or an interactive museum experience or an interactive exhibit, what comes to mind? Somebody says right away, touch, hands-on, visitors have to do something, science center, touch screens. Okay, cool. I love those answers. A lot of times when people think about interactive experiences, they often think about touching something. Somebody just mentioned responding to something. I think those are all good responses. I'll just say that certainly when I started working in the museum business, most of the time, interactive experiences or hands-on experiences lived in science centers or children's museums primarily, but I do a lot of work. I'm working on a history museum right now, a canal museum, and that has plenty of interactive experiences. So I think if you want to reach a broad audience, if you want to create accessible experiences, interactive experiences are great for that. So I'm going to queue up a PowerPoint here, share my screen. Hold on just a second. So many windows. All right, let's share that. If you would be kind enough to give me a thumbs up or say, yes, we can see your screen. Awesome, that's great. There's nothing worse than doing a presentation that only I can see. So today I wanted to talk about what makes an interactive. And there are several elements, some of which folks already touched on, but these are the things that I think about when I'm developing an interactive experience or an interactive exhibit. And we're going to talk about 7 things. Just a little note, at the end of the session, I have some materials that sort of recap this information. So if you are a note-taking person, go right ahead. But also Dixie is going to be kind enough to share some links to materials that recap what we're talking about. And also at the end of the session, I'll share a link to some additional free resources on my website. There's my plug, that you can take a look at first. So the first aspect of interactive exhibits that I want to talk about is, unsurprisingly, touch, getting touchy. But the question I have for you is, does interactive always mean hands-on? And this is an interesting video illusion, depending on the size of the screen that you're looking at right now. If you move closer or farther away from this image, you should see it look like it's changing. To me, that's an interactive experience. I mean, as a very simple example, an optical illusion is an interactive experience, but you don't have to touch it at all. So I think interactive and hands-on often get conflated together, which is great. A lot of interactive experiences are hands-on. But I think one of the most important aspects of interactive experience is, to use a different cliche instead of hands-on, is minds-on. If people are engaged, if people are curious about the experience, if there's an experience that people stick with or tell other people to come watch them experience it or work with other people on it, that to me is an interactive experience. And not every interactive experience has to be hands-on. I've done a lot of work recently in history museums, and it's interesting to me. Even in a traditional hands-on museum like a science center or a children's museum, they often will have a big dollhouse display, a hands-off dollhouse display. And yet, even in the midst of the hustle and bustle of a science center or children's museum, people will take the time, engage with kind of looking through the rooms and telling stories and talking about the dollhouse with each other. And again, that's an interactive experience that's not hands-on, but is definitely engaging and interactive. So interactive doesn't always mean hands-on. That was a trick question at the beginning. So thanks, though. It often means hands-on, but not always. So what next? I think interactive experiences should be intuitive experiences. Like, I get it. I understand, Another aspect of interactive experiences, which I think is really important, is the notion of reset. When somebody engages with the interactive exhibit and then they walk away, is the exhibit ready for the next person? Does it automatically reset? Is there something about it that is reset? So this is a photograph of a simple reset interactive. It's a probability board. You put balls in at the top, and then it creates a distribution curve at the bottom. When you pull a little drawer out from underneath, the balls fall down, and it's ready to go for the next person. So that's a sort of a simple reset. I'm going to give you an example of a horrible non-reset interactive exhibit that I often see. A jigsaw puzzle or a magnetic board jigsaw puzzle. Often, for whatever reason, in nature centers, they're like, oh, put together the puzzle to show the ecosystem And then, okay, great. I put together a puzzle. Maybe it's a simple puzzle, 6, 8, 10 pieces. But then there it is, all assembled for the next person who's there. I mean, really, are they going to pretend they didn't see the assembled puzzle, take it apart, and then do it? So I think reset is really important. I brought one of my favorite toys today. We'll see if I can show it off a little bit, which I like as a reset for a slightly different reason. So these are little toys. They're wooden. They look like little people, and they have a sort of a punny name. It's called Building. The little person's name is Building because you do building with them. And you can put them together so that they form different sort of configurations. The cool thing about that is even if I stopped right here, it still leaves a natural place for people to engage with it. So it's not like it has to be completely put away to be an interactive reset. So I think that's an important consideration. Reset. Don't make a jigsaw puzzle exhibit for your next interactive unless there's a way for it to reset for the next person. Zip back to the front. It's kind of a weird experience. Since you're all invisible to me, I'll just say as we go along, again, if people have questions or comments, things that resonate with you, feel free to pipe up either verbally with your audio on or in the chat. The next aspect of interactivity that I think is a good sort of watchword or a good way to think about interactive exhibits is, as I mentioned before, is it intuitive? I really like this example. This is from a small science center. It's a simple hand battery exhibit, basically focusing on how electricity can conduct through our body. And then it shows the results on that yellow meter there. But the thing I really like about it is even if you didn't read the label, if you walked up to this exhibit, you would have a sense of what you were supposed to do. And if you put your hands on those metal handprints, you would get a reaction. You would see some change in the digits there of the multimeter. So there's an old saw that people don't read labels. I don't know if that's true or not, but I like to help people get a sort of burst of interactivity by making the experience intuitive. I don't want to force somebody to read 6 directions before they get some sort of interesting response. So it's helpful if the experiences that people are engaging with, the interactive elements, have an intuitive aspect of it. Great. Another important aspect, I think, of interactivity is that there's a wow, something that pulls you in, but then there's an aha. And so this is an example of a light table. The person there, you can see their hands. They're playing with lenses, bending the rays of light with the different kinds of lenses. And I just wanted to give a shout out to one of my favorite inspirations, one of my favorite modern artists. His name is Ólafur Eliasson. That's his name there in parentheses. And his work has often been described as a wow and then an aha. So it kind of fits together with the intuitive aspect of things. How can you create a wow? What's something that pulls people in? What's something that's going to stop people? But then it's not just like sticking your finger in a socket and getting an electric shock, although that would be a wow and an aha. But let's think about safe wows and ahas. So this example I think is great, and I'd commend to your attention Ólafur Eliasson. if you look at his website, or if you ever have an opportunity to see any of his work in museums. I don't think he would consider himself a science center person, but if I won the lottery, I would pick Olafur Eliasson to help develop interactive exhibits in a science center, because he deals with elemental aspects of motion and light and things that very much cross the boundaries between art and science. Cool. So this, I think, is another thing that I think about when I'm thinking about interactive exhibits. If you think about it, if you've ever been to an exhibition, an interactive exhibition at a science center, an art museum, a children's museum, what have you, sometimes there are bottlenecks in the traffic flow, because oftentimes an interactive experience is a very solo experience. I like to think about opportunities where people can work together and talk together and interact together, even if they're strangers. I mean, this picture probably is a family group. Looks like it could be some adult caregivers and children, but they all seem happy and they all seem engaged. Might be a PR photo, but nevertheless, they seem happy and engaged. And you can see that there's something for all of them to be doing together with the tracks on this exhibition. So I brought a prototype along of an exhibit that I've used that really encourages people to work together. I'll tell you a little bit about how I developed this interactive exhibit. And I deliberately chose one that was from a history museum. So let me tell you the challenge that they gave me here. They were putting together an exhibition from their collections of beautiful red, white, and black. All of the objects were red, white, and black needlepoint, like this. So pieces of yarn in a matrix, very much geometric, but it happened that all the things that were in their collection and that were on display in this exhibition were red, black, and white. The curators gave me a challenge. I think they knew that people with young children probably wouldn't be that engaged by red, black, and white needlepoint up on the walls. No knock against needlepoint, but I'll have to say the subject matter was a little dry, especially if you were a child, or you were an adult caregiver with a child. So they said, we'd like to create experiences where kids and adults can work together and appreciate a little bit more and spend a little bit more time with the red, white, and black needlepoint. So we put together, after a few iterations, what we called a bead loom. These are big wooden beads in, coincidentally, red, black, and white. We put several of these on tables in front of some of the wall displays, and we just gave a simple open-ended directive. What designs can you make today? Not, look at the red, white, and black needlepoint that Esther Smith made in 1896. And can you make something like that? I hate to make people feel dumb, so I don't like to write labels like that. I'd rather give them a little open-ended cue, a prompt, something to get them started. And then people took off with this. It was really gratifying to see how adults and kids, or kids and kids, would work together and talk about their designs. And then naturally, unforced, because they were in front of walls with red, white, and black needlepoint, they would talk about it often. They would say, oh, look at this, or can we make a triangle shape? Or they would just do free play. that was reflective of sort of the natural process that people who make needlepoint with red, black, and white elements might have done in a similar grid. The other nice thing about this, just harkening back to what I mentioned earlier about a reset, is even if you came across the bead loom in this sort of condition, it didn't feel like it was already finished. It felt like you could change things around or you could add things to this, and it still was a satisfying experience. It didn't need to be completely cleared to still have it be a reset, a positive reset, interactive experience. So there's a bead loom. Steal that idea if you're ever doing an exhibition with red, white, and black needlepoint. I'm going to just check the chat here and there. All right. Somebody gave it a thumbs up. Thank you. Let's move on. If I had to pick with every client I work with, regardless of the type of museum they're from, a children's museum, a science center, a history museum, an art museum, a zoo, botanical gardens. I've worked and done interactive exhibits with all those types of museums. I think the number one consideration or the number one concern that sort of makes people anxious about including interactive exhibits, whether they're physical exhibits, mechanical exhibits, or digital exhibits, is the notion of whether the exhibits will be durable and maintainable. Let me just say, my heart always feels sad when I see an out of order sign in any museum, or if I touch a touch screen that doesn't work in a museum, which seems to happen sometimes. I mean, it just feels sad. Also, I mean, from a visitor standpoint, I have a reasonable expectation that most of the things, hopefully all of the things, will be working and I'll have a satisfying experience. I know sometimes it feels like, and it's a perceptual thing, if even just a few things are not working, then people are like, oh, everything's broken in this place, nothing's working, which is a horrible thing for people to feel. So what can you do to combat that? I'll offer a few suggestions and tips, and I'll just call out again as a reference. The Children's Museum of Pittsburgh created an interactive art program where they would partner with artists that was called Tough Art. I love that, Tough Art, because they knew that they wanted to provide beautiful aesthetic experiences, artful experiences to their audience, albeit in a children's museum. Although I will say the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh actually has actual Andy Warhol paintings hanging inside their museum, so it's pretty artful children's museum. But they deliberately brought people in, artists, to work with their audience and to basically harden their ideas. And the trick was that the people who created the experiences also had to stick around for a certain period of time as part of their agreement to maintain their experiences. So I would say it keeps people honest if the people who are creating the interactive experiences are also the people who have to maintain them. Because it's one thing to say, wow, here's this cool idea, and now you've paid me the last check, and goodbye, you'll never hear from me again. That's a bad situation, you know? You want to have people create things, whether you're internal staff or whether you're working with community or creative partners from outside your museum, that are going to be, I hate to say it, on the hook. That keeps people honest. I think the other thing that I would offer as just encouragement for wherever you work, whatever type of museum, whatever size of museum, whatever your internal capacity. I would say it's okay if things break. I tend to be an eternal optimist even after 40 years in the museum business. I once created an exhibition with kaleidoscopes, and one of the explainers, the floor staff, got really upset when one of the kaleidoscopes went missing. Or maybe it was stolen, I don't know. Um, and they basically asked the question of, like, well, why should we put these things out that people can interact with? Why shouldn't everything just be inside a vitrine or a case? Because people break things or people steal things. And my only response to you in a more optimistic light is that if you design interactive experiences as if the majority of your visitors are either breakers or stealers, you're not designing a museum exhibit, you're designing a prison. I think that occasionally things go missing. I think occasionally things get broken, and I'll hope that they were loved to death just because they passed through thousands of hands of enthusiastic people. But as long as you have replacement parts, or you've built something, or you understand how something was built, you can repair it. I mean, you would never not buy a car because you had to replace tires on it eventually. I mean, that's an expectation. If something gets used, it gets worn out or it breaks, and you just want to make sure you have the capacity internally to repair or replace the things that are worn out or broken. All right. So that's my what seems like a Zoom soliloquy. Sorry, about interactivity, but just to hit the highlights again. Interactive things don't always need to be hands-on. It's important that things can be reset and done again. It's great if things are intuitive, because then people can get great experiences even without the label. I love wow, then aha. I think interactive experiences that involve people working together are awesome. Um, it's important to have really strong stuff, but also it's okay if things break or occasionally things disappear, as long as you can replace them. Um, I'm going to make a plug because we're going to take a little break here for Q&A or comments, but this is a segue to the next part of the session, which is prototyping. You will see that I am a big fan of prototyping, and we'll talk more about that in the next section here. But I think the way that you create great experiences and listen to your visitors and learn from the way your visitors mess around with and do things that maybe you didn't even expect with your interactives is just to watch what people do and to see if you can iterate and tweak and change your experiences to make them better and better. I'm a firm believer that the best exhibits don't sort of arrive like on the floor from the head of Zeus, like, here's the auteur theory of exhibition design, stand back, I am creating, and here's my beautiful exhibit. Don't let those horrible people touch it too much. That's not a great situation. I think you should leave some time and leave some money to do some testing and trying out things with your audience. And I think that's where I'll end for right now. Questions? Comments? Brickbats? Bouquets? See anything in the chat? Anybody want to speak up?
Looks like Helen used your bead loom idea at her museum.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great. And you got the beads at Joann's Fabric. That's I'll just say, it's not like you can. It's not like there's an Amazon exhibit store. I like to keep my eyes open for potential exhibit items, which we'll talk about momentarily when we talk about prototyping, because you need stuff to prototype with, to test things with, right? And sometimes you're in a drugstore or a car auto supply store or a hardware store, and you see something that's like, eureka, I can use this to test things out with. So that's great. I'm glad you use the bead loom at your museum. Any other questions or comments about interactivity? Man, I'm telling you, pay attention to the chat. If you want to do a bead loom, Helen's giving you the mini course right there. Helen, you wanna say something? I like that you popped up. Go ahead. Take yourself off mute, and if you want to say something about how you used bead loom in your situation. No, she's the most heard comment on Zoom. You're on mute. Or maybe can she unmute herself? Or does Dixie have the power to unmute people? There you go. You're unmuted.
Oh, I think we're still having the audio issues. Helen's had audio issues all conference. I'm sorry, Helen.
Sorry, Helen. Put your comments in the chat. We seem to be having audio issues.
Yeah.
But thanks for your comments about the bead loom. That's great. Okay, I'm gonna switch gears here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Oh, there we go. Man, I need to come to Alaska to work with Helen. I can tell she's got a lot of great ideas there. She's talking about how she used a pillow for a glacial rebound exhibition. So great, thanks. Okay, so I want to just shift gears a little bit then and talk about prototyping. Let me shift gears with my presentation here. Thanks for your patience as we move screens around. That goes there. While I am moving screens around, I will throw this question out to the crowd for a response. Similar to what I asked about interactivity or interactives, I'm just curious how many people use prototyping or testing in their museum or in the exhibits they develop. If you want to say yes or no in the chat, or if you want to wave your hand or give us a signal, that would be great. Well, oh, good. So there's some people who aren't doing prototyping right now in their situations, but they're willing to do it. So that's great. I'm glad you're willing to do it. I am going to give you the oomph to do prototyping. It would make me super happy if everyone who's at this session, after we're done, is inspired to test or prototype one thing that they're working on in the future. I'll give you that as a little enthusiastic challenge. So, what about prototyping? What does it mean? What do we think about when we're prototyping? I have to say, I was fortunate to be able to bring a genuine artifact today with me. It turns out, believe it or not, that there is a patron saint of museum exhibit prototyping. Believe it or not. I hope you believe it after this. And so I brought an artifact. I'm going to have to move back from the camera because I'm going to unfurl this amazing textile artifact that gives a representation of the patron saint of museum exhibit prototyping. You may have heard of storied textiles like the Shroud of Turin or great, beautiful wall hangings. But today I have brought to you all the way from the other side of the North American continent the beach towel of Elvis. This is the part where the audience, if we were here in person, you would all be going, ooh, ah. Or since you have yourself muted, you might be saying, oh no, what are we in store for now? But I'll just let you know that there is a reason that I brought my beach towel of Elvis with me today, because conveniently, aside from being a pop icon, Elvis's name resolves into 5 letters that form a handy mnemonic for when you're thinking about prototyping. So, the 5 letters of Elvis's name help guide our thinking about prototyping. And I mean, honestly, I don't carry the beach towel around with me everywhere. I only bring it out for very special occasions, so I hope you appreciate that. But let's talk about how Elvis can be a guiding light for museum exhibit prototyping. I'm going to share my screen here. Boom. And again, if you could give me a thumbs up if you see Elvis, thank you. So, Elvis, the exhibit prototyper. Come on. If we have a little time, I'll sing Viva Las Vegas later. But for now, Elvis, the exhibit prototyper. So, what do these 5 letters resolve to, and what do they help us think about when we're thinking about exhibit prototyping? Well, E, the first letter, is everyday objects. And so this is the audience participation of the section. I'm going to pull some responses out of you from across the North American continent. And my question to you is, if you are prototyping or trying out or testing exhibits, why start with everyday objects? And there's a handy visual there, paper clips, those are everyday objects. Like, why would you want to start with everyday objects if you were prototyping or testing some exhibit ideas? Either call it out or put it in the chat. Some people said easy and cheap to source. They're handy, accessible, availability, all of the above. Good response, Cynthia. Availability, don't care if it doesn't work. Oh, that person, Christine, gets a gold star. You all get gold stars, but I'll give Christine an extra gold star for saying, don't care if it doesn't work. I mean, I think the reason to start with everyday objects, paper, tape, paper clips, string, to start out with, not to finish with, to start out with, is that there's a very low threshold there. You're starting with materials that are handy, that are available, that are, dare I say it, cheap. So if your idea turns out to be maybe not such a great idea, it's not so precious. You're like, oh, this is just paper and tape. I'm going to try something else, or I'm going to add something onto this paper and tape. As opposed to, oh, I ordered that piece of NASA grade titanium from McMaster Carr. It took 2 weeks to get here and it cost $1,000. This idea has to work because I spend so much time and effort to get the materials to test it with. That's a bad place to start, in my opinion. You want to be quick and dirty and cheap, move fast and break things, as they say. And so when I do a live in person prototyping workshops, I ask people to think about transforming themselves into office supply ninjas. You want to be able to take a paper clip or some blue duct tape or blue masking tape, some paper, some string, and really start to think with your hands. Make your ideas real. Make them full scale if you want. And that's a way to start to think about, oh, yeah, is that going to work? Oh, let me put this in front of somebody who hasn't been working for 3 months on this exhibit idea. Do they get it? Do they understand it? So I'm a big fan of office supply ninjas and simple materials because that's a way to move fast, change your ideas, and not treat them as too precious. When you're prototyping, it's funny, I did some work in Bulgaria, and the whole idea of, like, talk about lost in translation. The idea of prototyping was like, whoa, what is this? You mean you want to make mistakes? You want to find out the problems with things? And then a week after I left, the project manager emailed me, Vesela. She said, I finally got everybody to understand that the point of a prototype is not to just try one thing and then we're done. You know, you need to try several things. You need to put things out in front of people and then see how they respond and then how you can change to make things better. So yeah, everyday objects, I'm a big fan of that. I have an everyday object with me right here. Let's see. Here we go. So let's see. What is this? This is a threaded rod, and it has some washers on it. Like that. Why am I showing you a threaded rod with some washers on it? Well, I'm going to tell you a story about how not to do prototyping. One time I worked with an artist, and I love working with artists, but this artist was not a fan of prototyping. She thought she knew, like, oh, this is my brilliant vision. This is going to work, no problem. And she had an idea for an exhibition that we did that was called, wait for it, On Hands. It was a hands-on exhibition about hands, all sorts of things, anatomy and moving things and stuff. So On Hands. And at the beginning of this exhibition was a series of vertical rods that had washers spacing in between blocks of wood. So imagine a bunch of vertical rods and blocks of wood that had pictures pasted on both sides. It's a great idea, actually, but it was horrible execution. It didn't work. The blocks got stuck. The things peeled off. And it was right at the entrance to the exhibit. Honestly, that was horrible because this was a small children's museum and we ran out of money. It's like, okay, here's this horrible thing. It doesn't work. It looks bad. And it's right the first thing when you see at the exhibition. So honestly, one day I got sick of it and I just disassembled the entire thing and took all the wood blocks off the metal rods. So all I was left with was a bunch of metal rods with metal washers on them. And then lightning struck. It was like the prototyping gods. It was like Elvis was reaching out from beyond, and he helped me realize that there was something cool we were left with. It turns out that the washers on the metal rods actually did a lot of cool things. They made these great sounds, and they made these great spinning actions. I'm trying to show you on the camera. It was actually a great exhibit. It was like a little race that you could do. Kids, it was very intuitive. It had a reset, everything about interactive exhibits. So everyday materials can do cool things, you know, but you need to really test things out with them. All right. L, looseness. When I think of prototyping, I think about keeping things loose, you know? Why? So I'll throw that out to the crowd, either in the chat or out loud. Why do you want to keep things loose when you're prototyping? At least at the beginning, why do you want to keep things loose? Anybody? Yeah, thanks, Amy. Allow for creativity. Yeah, multiple ways to engage with it. Not only one correct way. Yeah, go ahead, somebody.
No, I said it's easier to make changes if things are loose.
Especially at the beginning. Room to make changes for sure. And also, boy, I tell you, Christine Cassidy, I need to give her $1 after this is over. She said there's not just one right way to engage with things. If you only had one takeaway from this workshop, take those wise words to heart. You know, there's not just one right way to create an exhibit. If you have a great idea, there are usually multiple ways to do that. And that's actually a gratifying thing, because if you try out multiple ways, if you keep things loose, if you present things to visitors and see how they respond, you can often do things that fit within your time frame and budget. I mean, again, you know, when I go to talk with people and work with people at museums or museum companies to talk about prototyping, one of the, again, resistances that I receive, and you might be thinking too, oh yeah, this guy's talking about prototyping. We don't have time for that. We don't have money for that. My response to you is, if you don't have time and money to test things out, how are you going to have time and money to fix the things that don't work at the end? I think the time and money, even small amounts of money, paper clips don't cost a lot. Neither does paper and masking tape. Spending some time to work out some of the kinks and the details in a quick and cheap way pays dividends down the line. So yeah, keeping things loose at the beginning, being open to creative ideas, being open to interpretations that you might not have had. You know, a lot of times visitors will do things with prototypes or exhibits, and we're like, I never expected anybody to do that in a million years. But then sometimes, if you're not with blinders on, you're like, oh, actually, that's kind of interesting. Like, everybody who plays with this prototype is doing this thing that we didn't expect. Maybe we should pay attention to that. So I think it's important to keep things loose at the beginning. Keep your interpretations a little bit loose. I mean, if you're doing an exhibition about elephants, you still need to end up doing something about elephants. It's not about aardvarks now. But maybe there are some different ways, or there's more than one right way to come up with your ideas. So L is for looseness. Now I'll take a little pause for a drink. And I'm going to give you my V word. The V word is vermicious. If there's any Scrabble players or crossword people or Latin scholars out there, you might be able to tell us what vermicious means. Or you could take a guess from context clues as well. What do you think vermicious means, and why in the world am I bringing vermicious into the conversation? What does that have to do with prototyping? Stunned silence from the crowd. Oh, I'm getting some chat things here. Who knows? Somebody's saying wiggly, flexible. Yes, Amy, not without Googling it. That's good. That's all right. We'll tell you what it means. Recycling? Oh, those are great answers. I don't know if anybody here is a fan of the children's book author Roald Dahl, the person who wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We'll just give you a little literary hint here. The follow-up book to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, in that book they talk about vermicious canids. So if you ever read that book, or if you hearken back to that book, they talk about vermicious canids. Well, if you look at that picture, that person is holding a bunch of worms. And vermes, from the Latin, means worms. So why vermicious means worm-like, like a ball of worms, like things moving in and out to that. What in the world does that have to do with prototyping or thinking about exhibits? What do you think? No. Oh, come on. You've got the time zone on your side. It's late in the afternoon on the East Coast. It's not that late in Alaska. Why do you think we talk about a ball of worms, wormy stuff? Like what's that? Two interesting answers. And also a shout out that vermiculture is worms composting. Yes. Amy, I like that answer. How the parts interact. I love exhibit ideas. I love early prototyping ideas that deliberately try to move past the boxes that we often set up in the museum world. Oh, this is an art exhibition. This is a history museum. This is a science center. I would say that there are lots of places where topics like history and art and science overlap. And I think a lot of the most interesting experiences are where those things sort of overlap and they don't naturally fit into a box. It's another way of keeping things loose, but also I love the word vermicious. I needed a V for Elvis, and I wanted to encourage people when we're thinking about prototyping to think about things that sort of cross disciplines and cross ideas. So think about vermicious. Think about that V for Elvis when you're thinking about things being loose and that. And now I'll take a little pause for the cause here and share a little prototyping story again. I don't know if you can see what this is. It's a little canister. But this is a really cool canister. It's a toy. You might have come across this toy before. They sell a number of these canisters that have weights and noisemakers in them. This one happens to be a cow. So when you turn it over, the little rubber diaphragm goes down. And then when you turn it back up, hopefully you can hear this. So why am I showing you this? What does this have to do with vermicious and prototyping and looseness, all those good Elvis things? Well, it turns out I was given a challenge by a children's museum to create an exhibition as part of a farm exhibition to help kids understand the different noises that farm animals made. Spoiler alert, you can buy these things that make cheeping chicken sounds, they make sheep sounds, they have goose sounds, all mechanical things. They're not, not digital at all. They just work on gravity and air, and they make those sounds. So why was that important for this exhibition? I mean, there are digital noisemakers. There are, could do a video, I suppose, of the things. The problem was this actually was in an old stone barn, and there was no electricity in that part of the building. So the challenge was, okay, wise guy, we want you to make an exhibit that connects sounds with animals, but that can't use electricity. So we went to the store and we went to the toy store and we were like, these things don't use electricity. How can we use them? And so we created little handles. Imagine this thing being attached to like a broomstick with a spring, so that when you turn the handle, that was the shape of the animal's head, like a cow head or a chicken head or something. You could turn it, it would turn back, and it would make the noise. So that was a fun prototype. A lot of these prototypes come from these sort of wacky challenges, which is it's sort of interesting to me. So I just wanted to share an example of one because I brought some stuff here to show you. But marching along with Elvis, so we've done E, everyday objects. We've done L, looseness. We've done V. We've given you an etymological lesson in the history of vermicious, its Latin roots, and also vermicious canids from Roald Dahl. What does I stand for? Iteration. If you don't remember anything else about prototyping, remember the story of prototyping is try again. As my dear friend Vesela from Bulgaria realized, the point of prototyping is not to put something out like in a pro forma way, just to do it once and then to be done. That's not prototyping. In a way, similar to saying that there's more than one right way, there are many possible right answers for exhibits. You could also say, if you had a real masochistic bent, that a good interactive exhibit is never really finished, because you could probably think about ways to continue to improve it. But, we don't have in museums, and maybe it's just as well, we don't have infinite schedules and infinite budgets. So at a certain point, we have to say, stop, that's it. But I'd really encourage you to try again. Iteration is a super important part of prototyping. And I don't mean just like, okay, I need to do it 3 times and I'm done. It's more like, okay, we tested this out with our fellow staff people, with my family at home, at a library, at a local community center, with visitors on the floor in our museum, and we noticed how they reacted to this prototype. And then we changed some things to try and improve it. You're sort of constantly knocking off the rough edges to make the experience better and better. It is a little masochistic in a way. You're looking for the problems. Nobody ever calls me and says, oh, we really love the 99% of the new exhibits you installed that are working without a problem and that people love. They're like, this button's not working on this exhibit, or this one stopped. It's sort of the nature of the beast. But I like to look at it as a challenge and an opportunity, really, to make things better. I used to work with a professor emeritus at the University of Michigan, professor emeritus of physics, and his attitude about fixing things, which is sort of a parallel to prototyping, was that you don't want to fix things back the way they were before. You want to fix them better so that the odds of you having to keep fixing things goes down. It never approaches zero exactly, but the asymptote gets much closer to zero. So I is for iteration. And then S is for sharing. And this is always a plug I like to make about how can we become better professional sharers. Like our friend who was sharing her experiences with the bead loom. It's great. I think one of the nicest things, and maybe one of the strengths, one of the superpowers of the museum world, is the tendency of people to be generous and to share information. At least I hope so. I like to be that way, and I like to work with people like that. I mean, if you come up with a great idea, man, spread the word. let other people benefit and learn from your hard knocks. And then hopefully you can learn from their experiences and bring things into your own practice and work. So I'm going to stop sharing. Speaking of sharing, that's Elvis. But I want to share a different screen here and then open up the floor to questions. I'm going to give a plug. All you lucky people we're all so lucky to be here together with each other. I'm just going to, okay, can you give me a thumbs up? You see the screen there? Awesome. There's my website. That's an easy website. And I'm going to point you towards stuff, no obligation, free resources, especially if you're exhibits people. So if you go to my website, it's my last name, orselli.net. There is, in the navigation bar, there is something called resources. Boom, when you go to resources, there are a whole bunch of free things. And one thing I just added that I'm really happy about, I edited over the years 4 volumes of inexpensive exhibit ideas, inexpensive exhibit recipes that were contributed by colleagues from all around the world. They're called the Exhibit Cheat Books, and they were originally published by Aztec, the Association of Science Technology Centers in Washington, D.C. They recently reorganized and eliminated their publications division. And I said to them, but what about the cheat books? And they said, they were very kind. We worked out an arrangement so that if you go to the website, you can actually click and get free access to PDFs. The 4 volumes altogether have just about 90, a little less than 100 exhibit ideas that are meant to be replicable in lots of different situations and easy and cheap to build. And again, they were shared by colleagues from all over the world. So there's also free articles and free videos. So I'll just, I don't want to ring the bell here anymore, but I just wanted to, in the spirit of sharing and in the spirit of free stuff, check out the website, and hopefully there's some cool stuff that can help you with your work and inspiration. So let me stop sharing here and let me open up the floor to any questions or comments about prototyping that folks might have. Where do you get the animal noisemakers? Oh yeah, by the way, if people want to, my wife always yells at me. She's like, why do you like, feel free to email me. I'm happy, say, hey, I was at your workshop for the Alaska Museum's workshop. Something might come to mind after the workshop's over. So I'm happy if people want to email me or have questions afterwards too. But time is of the essence. Does anybody have any questions or comments about prototyping or interactivity? You are a very tractable and polite group.
Hey, Paul, this is Amy. Thanks so much for your great tips thus far. I was wondering, you were mentioning prototyping and trying it out. Do you have some strategies? Like, what's the best way to do that? Do you put it out in the gallery and kind of monitor? Do you get your, should we get our staff around it and play with it? What do you suggest there?
That's a great question. Thank you. Thanks. I mean, I think ideally, you want to put things in front of people who are a good cross-section of your potential visitors. If you work in a children's museum, it's great if you bring your prototype to the old age home, but that might, maybe they're children at heart, but you want to try and get a good cross section of visitors. I'm a big fan of just, even if it's just temporary, going out there with staff, even staff who aren't exhibits people. See if you can hook some of those folks to help you, because they haven't been involved in all the months of research and things, and they might ask some questions that on the surface are the kinds of questions that visitors are going to ask. Most of the visitors haven't been researching the exhibit topic for months like you have. So you mentioned going out on the floor. I'm a big fan of, like, man, just bringing out a table, temporary stuff, setting things up. It's almost like you've become an exhibit busker. Gather around. Hey, would you like to help us try it? We're working on a new exhibit. We'd love to get your input. This is the place where prototyping and evaluation, where the two Venn diagrams overlap. And I'll give you a bonus, like my favorite type of evaluation question. The trick is, from my perspective, you don't want to put somebody on the spot by asking them a question that's either going to make them self-conscious, or by asking them a question that is designed to sort of make them feel like, oh, I don't want to hurt this person's feelings, so I'm going to give them the answer that I think they want to hear. So here's an example of a question that's like not such a great question. Gee, Amy, what did you think of this exhibit prototype? Because right away I'm pointing the finger at you. And if you think the exhibit prototype stinks, you weren't raised by wolves. You're probably unlikely to say that because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. You're a nice person. You weren't raised by wolves. But if instead I asked you a question and said, gee, what do you think museum visitors might think about this? What do you think other school kids might think about this? You've like sort of deliberately broadened the range and taken the spotlight off one person. And it's really interesting to see how people will give you a little bit more honest response to a broader framed question like that. Because you're not going to be able to get all the answers strictly just by observation and sort of kinetic motion. Oh, we saw the person do this. You're going to want to ask people questions. But again, you want to get honest answers, not the answers that they think you want to hear, or not the answers that they're giving you because, well, really, that exhibit stinks, but that person's a nice person. They're working hard. I didn't want to tell them their exhibit stinks. So you want to think about how can you frame questions? How can you arrange your exhibit elements so that you get some information that's really going to help you get to the next step? Nobody wants to be told their exhibit stinks. Neither do I. But if your exhibit stinks, maybe somebody should tell you, and then your goal is, okay, I'm going to make sure that we change this. Like, how can you tease out what are people not understanding? That's the other thing I'll just mention briefly, and then throw it open to other folks' questions. You can test or prototype for different kinds of things. You can test or prototype for functionality. Like, do people understand what to do with this thing? Like, do they understand they need to turn a knob or press a button or hook two things together? That's a real functionality thing. That's something that's worth testing, or prototyping. But there's also a conceptual thing. Okay, do they understand that when they connect these two things together, they're completing a circuit and the light lights up and they get the concept? Both of those things need to happen. They need to connect, literally, the circuit, but they also need to understand, like, why, like, what is this exhibit about? So I'm a big fan of breaking things into manageable chunks. You know, you could put a prototype out there that is trying to determine 6 different variables, but good luck trying to figure that out and where things are falling apart if you're trying to manipulate some complex 3-dimensional matrix with 6 different variables. You might just want to find out, like, do people know to twist this knob to make something happen? That might be it. Like, that might be actually a win. Okay, everybody who did this understood that's how they interact with the exhibits. You know, think about those handprints we saw. You know, that's a great intuitive thing. How can you test for that functionality and intuitiveness in your exhibits? That was a long rambling answer to your question, but I hope it answered your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Paul. I was thinking also as you were visiting about, us asking these prompting questions, and it makes me think as a mom, when you're talking to your child and can you describe, or, rather than like looking for question and answer type format. So that's wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah, think. So I have 4 children. I've like preternaturally gotten into the mode of, oh, what's a question that I can ask my kids that doesn't just elicit a 1-word response? Did you have a good day today? Like, what did you do in school today? Nothing. Did you have a good day at school? No. Or yes. But that's not exactly a great conversation. Another way to think about the exhibit ecosystem you're setting up is, how can you foster that sort of conversation between the institution and its visitors, or between visitors themselves inside the exhibition? If it's just like, oh, how many legs does an elephant have? The thing is, everybody knows you're pointing them towards the one right answer. And if they don't get the one right answer, oh, I didn't get the one right answer. Bad question, bad exhibit, bad framework. That's not, you want to foster some more of a broad kind of conversation or exhibit experience. All right. Any other burning questions about prototyping or interactivity? If not, I wish I had a drum roll. I had a drum around here, but I don't. Okay, that's fine. Cool. I'm just gonna check the chat. Awesome. Thanks for the kind words. So in the last part of the story here, I'd like to do a little paper and tape prototyping exercise with all of you. If I was there in person, I would have paper and tape for all of you. Maybe some of you have paper or tape or paper clips if you want to play along. But as you might expect, I have tape. I like blue tape, and I'll tell you why. And I have paper. This is just, 8.5 by 11 white printer paper. There's nothing magic about it. It's what I have around the house in my workshop. But I just want to tell you a little bit about blue tape. So this is blue painter's tape, 3M tape. It's the kind of tape that you can stick on walls and things, and as long as you're careful, pull it away without messing up the walls, and it'll stay up for a while. I like to use this kind of tape because I like to think outside of the 2-dimensional box with my prototypes. Sometimes a prototype idea wants to get stuck to a wall or a ceiling or a window, and I like to have something to be able to do that. So I'm going to actually offer this, since you are museum professionals, I'm going to offer sort of a little background about this, and then we're going to launch into the prototyping exercise. I happen to teach graduate students here in New York City in exhibition design, and let me just tell you, the wonderful graduate students who I encounter are incredibly gifted and facile with digital tools. You know, they can make a computer rendering that literally will knock your socks off. But paradoxically, they are not so familiar with making physical examples of things. So this kind of forces people sometimes out of their comfort zone, and I deliberately limit the materials. Like when I'm getting people to start at the beginning of the story, I just want them to have paper and tape, or tape and paper. Not like scissors, not colored markers, not like literally paper and tape. We're going to make something with paper and tape. And that's for two reasons. This is my bias. So I'll throw it out bloody and quivering on Zoom and share my bias with you. I think it's interesting, you know, constraints kind of foster creativity in a strange way. You know, if I gave you colored markers and pinking shears and all kinds of other tools, you might get a little lost in the sauce. But if I just give you tape and paper, you like really need to focus in on like, well, what's this prototype about? What am I trying to get across? What's the very essence of this thing? So I like to do that. The other thing I can tell you is that almost everybody has access to some sort of tape and paper. So, you know how I mentioned before, people tell me like, we don't have time or we don't have money to do prototyping. I'm like, come on. I know you have paper and I know you have tape. So like, why don't you just humor me and see what we can do? And actually, I think we can do awesome stuff with paper and tape. So now we are going to traverse the high wire of intellectual work together. I'm going to encourage you, if you like. I'm not going to browbeat you, but I'm going to encourage you for this last part of the session. If you would like to turn on your camera, great. If you want to turn on your microphone, great. If you don't, that's fine too. But what I'd like to do, this is sort of going to be like, you know, improv, exhibit improv. Maybe that's a way to think about prototyping. I never thought about that. So we need to come up with a potential idea to prototype, you know? So we're going to work through the process here. I wonder if anybody has a project that they're working on, or a dream project that they have, or a way that they would like to improve an existing exhibition or gallery area with some sort of interactive element. Let's make something that people can do something with here. We're going to prototype something that people can interact with. I wonder if anybody has an idea or something that we can prototype together. No pressure. I'll do, since I have a master's degree in education, I'm going to throw out that challenge, and then I'm going to pause for a few seconds. The good news is there's a safety net, because if someone doesn't have an idea that they'd like to prototype, I'll throw out an idea. But I like to give the audience a chance first. Is there an idea for an interactive exhibit or an interactive element that you'd like to try out?
Oh, I might kind of mention we're working on an exhibit related to the pandemic. It's featuring oral histories and artwork as well. We are not in the development phase, but we'd like it to be interactive somehow. So
all right. So okay. We're gonna take a topic ripped from the headlines. I'm gonna take that a kind of an interesting topic. COVID, would we say that's the topic?
Yeah. What responses to it.
What would we like people, give me one high level, and I'll throw this open to Amy and the entire group. If we were going to do an interactive exhibit component to help people learn or understand something about COVID-19, what is one big idea, like literally one pithy sentence, one big idea about COVID-19 we would like people to take away? Thoughts? The first part of prototyping is thinking. All right, somebody says transmission. That's a good thing, unless they're talking, ooh, loneliness. That's an interesting thing. Other thoughts? What comes to mind if you're thinking about what do you want people to think about or to take away? Like if we were going to distill our big idea into one simple, meaty sentence. Ooh, masks. Masks are a big part of this. Resiliency. Ooh, the science. All right. So now we're sort of doing a mental mind map here. Transmission, that's a big topic. Masks, that's a big topic. Loneliness, resiliency, that's a big topic. Understanding vaccines, science. So I'm going to put my thumb on the scale here because I want to make sure we actually make a prototype together, and I want to be mindful and respectful of people's times. Let's take two parts of this story that are recurring parts of this story: masks and transmission. So you could think about this as let's do a little equation here. COVID-19, a big part of COVID-19 is how it spreads, the transmission. And masks are maybe part of the story. Sorry, I shouldn't have said maybe. Masks are part of the story to reduce transmission. What could we do with that? If we wanted to set up an interactive exhibit, let's start out by saying we don't want people to be trying on masks and then letting other people try on masks in the exhibit. We would inadvertently be spreading quite a message about transmission and masks, but let's say that's not what we want to do. But let's say we do want to talk about COVID-19 and masks and the relationship of masks to stopping transmission. What could we do? With paper and tape. Ideas? Ooh, replicate a sneeze or a cough. Ooh, how to make your own mask with paper craft. I like that. Origami mask. Okay, we got some crafty people here. All right. So maybe this is an opportunity to design your own mask, like to build a better mask. How could we do that? So I'm gonna use a visual aid here. I'm gonna transform this piece of paper into a reasonable facsimile of a mask. And that handy sound effect you hear is me ripping the piece of paper into more of a mask shape. And maybe I'm gonna use more than one piece of paper. So I start out, I'm like, okay, well, what could I do with this? This kind of a mask shape. There's the part that fits over your mouth. There's maybe a strap or something. What if we started with that? How could we set up an experience where you could somehow encounter the transmission of the COVID-19 virus and your mask? Bethany says ping pong with masks and a replica with the virus. So Bethany, I'm going to put you on the spot. So if you only had paper and tape, how would you, I didn't give you any ping pong balls, so what would you do next, Bethany, if you were just working with paper and tape? And there's Bethany on the screen. Maybe you can see her there. I don't know, Bethany, I don't know if your volume is up.
She just rolled up a ball of paper.
Okay.
Ping pong.
So that seems like a great idea. So she's got a ball that is bumping up against a mask. Now I'm just gonna throw out this idea because I like to throw out ideas. What if some of your balls stuck to the mask and some of the balls didn't stick to the mask? We happen to have, if only we had a sticky material that we could use to make sticky things. You know, this is like thinking with your hands, right? Oh, okay. Does that make sense? Do we want to talk about things sticking to the mask or not? Like, does that help people? Does that carry the idea forward? What I would say is every time you have a question, that's something you can test and prototype. Like, you might just want to stop the story right there and say, okay, I want to make some examples of masks and I want to make some things that are representative of the virus. What do we do with that? Let's give these to people. Let's see how we do this. So now, Madeline, I don't know if it's Madeline or Madeline. Madeline said in the chat, poke holes in it. Oh, so maybe we've got some sort of variables with virus, but maybe we've got some variables with masks too. Like, do you have some things that represent more effective masks than others? Is that part of the message you want to carry across? Is that something you can test? Yes. Do people get the idea? Good question. I don't know. That's why we want to test it and prototype it. So, Bethany, thank you. You win the Show and Tell Zoom prize today with your visual explanation. But I mean, this is how you could start the story, you know? Here I've got a mask. Here's one type of mask. Do I have another type of mask? Do I want to get into the, you know, you might say, okay, that's great, but I actually am more interested in the physical structure of the virus itself or how the virus mutates. Like, what does it mean there's a Delta variant and a Mu variant? The sky's the limit, right? L is for looseness when we're thinking about Elvis. If there's an idea you want to try out, you could test it out. Sophie says, which I love this suggestion, there could be a goal, a cup made of paper, and you could try to toss something into it, balls of paper, one without a mask in front of it, one with a mask in front of it, which is easier. That's a great suggestion. That's something that's simple to try. Like, okay, now Sophie says, okay, I get what you started us out with just paper and tape, but I happen to have a whole bunch of paper cups here. Let's move up a notch, and I'm going to try something with cups, you know? And then you try that out. I mean, this, again, is an iterative process. Let's try this. Let's try this and see if people get it. Let's try this and see if people like it. Let's see this. Another bonus evaluation tip. After you let people try a prototype, ask them to tell you what the exhibit is about. What would they tell another visitor? What would they tell somebody who's at home, who's not with them now, what the exhibit is about? That's a great way to see if you're carrying the message across, or if you are inadvertently carrying across incorrect messages. I mean, an hour or two well spent with some of your visitors. I am a big fan of prototyping. You can do stuff in a short period of time and really get, jumpstart your thinking jumpstart your team camaraderie, and also really send a message to your visitors. We care that you're here. We care that what you think. We want you to have a great experience. I mean, those are all like underlying messages to prototyping and testing things. All right. Now we're really ramping up things. See, I like this. This is why I deliberately like to start out just with paper and tape, because now we've already moved from cups to birdseed mix. Birdseed mix and a mesh mask showing more layers, less goes through. I mean, that's awesome. How could we set that up so that it could be easily reset? You know, could you have a tube? Could you have a mask in the middle of the tube? Can you have stuff that you just turn this thing over? Could you have different tubes with different types of masks? You know, this is all over the place. All right. I'm just because we have a little time, and this seems like the accelerated class. Let's do one more. COVID I think is a great thing. COVID is you know, it's topical, it's timely, you know, whether we like it or not, COVID is here. It's still here. Different topic? Throw one more out? I like what Amy did. That's working smarter, not harder, Amy. If you're working on a topic, you've got a lot of colleagues and a presenter here who might pitch you an idea for free that you can use. If anybody working on something or thinking about something that could benefit from an interactive experience? I'll give you my educator's pause here. See if somebody comes up with another idea. If not, I'll throw one other idea out. But I'd like to hear what you're working on. All right, going here. Anybody gonna jump in? All right. Okay, I'll pitch an idea, and then you tell me how we can play it out with paper and tape. Oh, I should throw you out an Alaska idea. Here, this'll be great. This is designed to get a response from the crowd. What's a way you could use paper and tape to keep warm? Let's say you are, oh, design a parka. All right, there you go. So let's say let's say that we'll give you a survivor scenario, right? You're stranded, your car stopped. You just came from a prototyping workshop with Paul Orselli, and you have paper and tape in the back of your car. What are you going to do? You have a car, you have a paper, you have car, you have paper and tape. We really ramped up the odds here. Sorry. This is so you can survive. What do you think? I like, somebody said design a house, design a parka. Like Sophie is, you must have given one of the origami answers there. I like that. So soak the paper in gasoline. Now this is This is interesting thinking. Emergency blanket, origami quilt. How much paper can you make a fire? Good question. If you're trapped in your car, how would you make a fire? Or would you want to make a fire inside your car? Good question. Crumple up the paper and stuff it in your clothes. Yeah, cool. So I like those answers because they reinforce something we said before, that there are many right answers in the exhibit business, right? You start out with the same premise, but you could come at it successfully in lots of different ways. Okay.
We did have someone who responded saying there's an animal display of large game. Is that Madeline?
Madeline. Is that a project you're working on, Madeline?
Are you able to unmute and tell us more?
Or in the chat? Yes, eventually.
We have multiple big game mounts and limited space, and as yet no museum building, but we're planning exhibits and hoping to find some good interactive things for children. The school is a couple blocks from our would-be museum, so we're looking for things they can do to really appreciate the big game we have here in Alaska.
So tell me, Madeline, just a little bit more about the mounts themselves. Are these full mounts, or are these sort of head and shoulder mounts, or what kinds of things are we talking about?
A variety of mounts. We have a full 9-foot 7-inch Kodiak brown bear. We have a smaller brown bear with a porcupine encounter in a case. We have full sheep mounts. We have a full bison mount. We have a whole bunch of smaller game animals that are all taxidermied. And we have a collection of 40 years that someone wants to donate to us if we can figure out how to use it.
Cool.
So we have a lot.
Okay. Well, let's play the game one last time. I'll leave it to you, Madeline. Do you want to pick one of the animals? Like, if I was going to pick, I'd pick that Kodiak bear, but I'm agnostic about it.
I'm good with the Kodiak bear.
Okay, cool. So let's do a rapid fire thing. So Madeline and the audience, if you had a mounted Kodiak bear, I'm presuming since you said it was like 9'7", it's on its back legs and standing up. What is you'll notice I'm going to ask again. What's the big idea? Give me one distilled idea that you would like people to take away about the Kodiak bear. Ooh, animal adaptations. Okay, what's size and power? Absolutely. So size, cool. So okay, that's great. Size. So let me just say that for most people, the most interesting thing possible in a museum exhibit is something that has to do with them. So let's make a comparison size-wise between a visitor and the Kodiak bear. I'm just going to say we want to do this without having them have to touch the Kodiak bear, because since it's a taxidermy mount, I'm going to presume that you don't want people sort of like grabbing hunks of fur out, or like whatever. Maybe you want them to take a selfie. I don't know. What would be some good ways that you could get people to appreciate a size comparison between themselves and the Kodiak bear? Yeah, I love that. Create a paper replica of their paw and allow people to put their hand on top or their foot. So you might have some full-scale paw prints in front of the bear on the floor. Great. What's another comparison? Ooh, mirror across from the bear so you can stand next to it and see yourself and the bear. Always a selfie moment. That's always a good one. So height, we've got paws, we've got height. What's another comparison that we could do? Height chart, great. Could we include the growth between a cub and a full-grown adult Kodiak bear, as well as a child to a full-grown adult? You know, give people a way to enter the story. I might be an adult caregiver. I'd like to have fun with this too. So give me a way in for me. But I'm a kindergartner. Give me a way into this. So you have that. Ooh, how much a bear eats and how much you eat. Model tooth comparison. Great. Let's pause for the cause for a second. What could we do with the food comparison? What would be a way you could play that out? Anybody? Bethany's saying berries. Cool. Yeah, how many berries does a bear eat in a day? And how does that stack up to what you might eat? Yeah, I like that. So maybe you have some realistic food models. Salmon on a plate, 20 salmon. Is there something else we could do with that? Could you have a balance? That's like a bear versus human and you move food around. I love the idea of a human-sized stomach and a bear-sized stomach. That's a nice comparison. Maybe you have a balance that is on one side a bear-sized stomach that you fill up, and on the other side the balance a human-sized stomach that you fill up. But how does it reset? That's the next part of the test, right? Cool. I hate to say don't look a gift horse in the mouth, but actually, if you could come up with some interesting takeaways, and I don't know if they're all native animals, like that would be my preference. You know, you're in Alaska, here are all Alaskan animals. What are some cool reference about adaptations or activity or human to animal comparisons that you could do? I mean, somebody mentioned teeth in the description. You know, there's an obvious takeaway from the dinosaur exhibit, playbook, carnivores versus herbivores. What's the difference between their teeth? Are some of your teeth more like herbivore or carnivore? Again, here's a mirror in that. I like Bethany's thinking about a lever that dumps it for the reset. I'm gonna throw you a curveball just because that's the kind of guy I am. There's always the end process of digestion. Kids love that. Could you have a replica poop comparison? Get the scoop on poop. What's a bear poop look like compared to a caribou poop? Or a squirrel poop? Or heaven forfend, a human poop? That depends on your museum. Although I will say, You can buy very realistic scat replicas from some of the nature and science supply houses. Guaranteed crowd pleaser. Cool. All right. So I'm 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 happy to have had the time to speak with you today. I wish it was in person, both because I like doing things in person, and also I'd be happy to go back to Alaska maybe one day. Before we wrap up, I'll throw open the gates both to any questions or comments now, but also I will throw open the gates to say that if something strikes you after the conference, I'd be delighted to respond to email or a question if people have them.
We had a couple of questions in Huva before this started.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Online exhibits.
That's there. Actually, there was a question about online exhibits, and there was a question about virtual reality.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you get the full force Paul Orselli here. I'm going to steal a line that I heard somebody use about virtual reality. It's neither virtual nor reality. Not a fan, honestly. But that's just, one man's opinion. Sorry. Sorry if you were planning a virtual reality exhibit. Sorry. I'll just redeem myself and say I still play Pokemon Go, but that's augmented reality. But maybe we can spend a minute talking about how to bring a little bit more oomph and excitement to online exhibits, since that also is sort of part and parcel of the COVID landscape and the post-COVID and pre-COVID landscape, I suppose, too. I'm wondering if because the person who put that question in, put it in way early. Good for you. And I'm glad. Good catch, Dixie. Before we wrapped up, that I said, ask it in the session. Is the person who asked that question here? I don't know.
Yep, she's here.
Oh, cool. Do you for the person who asked about online exhibits, do you want to unmute your microphone? Do you want to expand on your question a little bit? Or do you just want to say?
Hi, this is Amy. Yeah, I was asking in regards to, for myself, what I ended up doing after we shut down and were able to reopen at limited hours and whatnot, that we made the decision to have I'm calling them like virtual exhibits, but it's really just me picking pieces from the collection. I'm the curator of collections. And so I choose particular works from the collection that jive with our monthly theme. And then I do a little research and background information and write up a script. And our digital media person will take a day to photograph and film the objects I selected, and then my script is recorded at another date, and then he combines them together. And I mean, it's hard to tell, like we can get some numbers from viewers, whether it's in YouTube, Facebook. So there's the different social media platforms, but it's just, I guess I was trying to see if you had any ideas on how to enhance that, or it's different. I don't know. It's not quite the same.
No, it's fine. I'm glad you asked that question early, because it gave me time to think about it before this session. So my answer will seem a little bit more intelligent than usual. But I had two suggestions, but I'd also, in our waning moments, throw it open to our colleagues also. But maybe I just had one question and then I had two suggestions. So the items that you feature, is the experience pretty self-contained In other words, is there, for example, a suggestion of an adjunct activity or some sort of exploration that people can do in response to the object? Or is it more of an opportunity for people to learn about the object and the stories associated with it itself?
The second option that you mentioned, but that's a really great idea to try to figure out a better way to involve folks. And I can also maybe utilize that to learn from our viewers. And possibly some of the communities we represent.
So I'm going to give you two quick suggestions that I've played around with and had. One is very much like the bead loom suggestion. You know, when I showed you the bead loom, like, is there a simple activity that you could offer people to do at home that relates to the object or the story of the objects? That's one suggestion. The other suggestion is totally a social media thing. So let's say, as a simple example, the object that you featured was a hat. Could you have people show a photograph of themselves on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok of, in this case, a hat and a story associated with it? So, you know, with a hashtag related to that activity or your museum, so that it's a way of sort of using people's interest to help spread your message beyond just the stuff that you're putting out there. Those would be two suggestions that struck me.
Thank you. Those are great ideas.
Any other, let's tap the brain trust here, though, since we still have a couple of minutes. Other suggestions? I see Amy put a link in the chat. Other suggestions to help our colleague out, or to help yourself out too, you know? What are some ways that we could engage visitors with online exhibits or online features of collection items? I'm gonna give you a hint. Put your email in the chat. Or anybody else who wants to explore that topic, put your email in the chat. You could have a little working group, because I dare say that the kind of ideas that you would come up with at your museum are probably transferable to other folks' museums. Yay, we get that last S for sharing for Elvis in again.